This is my new HO scale layout. Well, this is actually only about half of it. There's a whole nother side right here. This layout was a true test for me. I have never bet so much money on something in the hobby and not had an idea if it was even going to work. And this project nearly fell apart right in front of me, literally.
This video is brought to you with support from Walthers, proudly serving model railroaders since 1932.
I wanted an HO scale layout, but simply didn't have the space available for it. So I had to get a little creative and go a little vertical. This is a 4-foot by 7-foot HO scale layout. It uses code 100 track, cork roadbed, and is DCC. I have plugs on my DCC system that I can just swap the plugs out. So my N-scale system, which is just off camera over there, I can just plug this in there without having to have its own system. But I might give it its own someday. I do want to thank Walthers for partnering with me on this layout. A lot of the items you have seen here are Walthers products, including several of the buildings, the crossing signs, and the train you'll see running on it. The base of this entire thing is on a 2x4 folding workbench from Costco. That's C-O-S-C-O, not the bulk retailer. I'll link it in the description below, don't worry about that. I picked this up about 2 years ago with the intention of building this layout, and it just took me a while to get all the pieces in place for this. Now, for the actual layout itself, what's here, I have simple OSB because it's cheap and effective and relatively lightweight. And I've been building this layout for about 6 months and been through the full range of humidity, and I haven't had any issues with alignment or warping or anything like that. Now, this is actually two 4-foot wide by 3.5-foot long sections that I attached to the workbench using 9 screws per side, attaching it to the actual workbench. Now, I did a ton of measurements to make sure that my boards line up, because that is the most important thing of what will make this layout run, is if it will line up so that the track will line up. Now it's time to see if the layout will actually fold, and this is the most nerve-wracking part. If the first fold up on the layout did not work and it completely collapsed, I was sunk and about $250 in the hole. So let's just see what happens. I mean, you knew it worked because the layout's right here, but the sides were not perfectly aligned. And I did expect this. So to align the sides, I installed some swing locks, and you can actually see them right here. I've got them right here. And you can see the little clips and pins right here. Let me pin that right there. You can see those are right there. And those are basically the things that you use to lock windows, but they actually did a really great job for this. Now, actually on this side back here, it was pretty even, but this side right here had a little bit of a unevenness. But luckily I was able to figure out to do this. I used a clamp to hold it in place, and then I installed the swing lock, and that was able to make it basically an alignment lock that basically clamped it in place perfectly, and it's been working that way perfectly ever since. Okay, now we need to do this track work. And for this, I'm using Atlas Code 100 track. This includes their loop starter pack that you can buy, and an additional turnout and a few extra straight sections, and that's all you need. I'll link that in the description below. I place my track where I want it, and then I mark the center line of the track with a pin so that I can glue down the roadbed. I'm using Midwest Products cork roadbed with Loctite power grab to glue it down, and some of the push pins to hold it in place. And I work my way from the outside in. That's the best way I figured out to do roadbed on a loop like this. You do an entire outside, and then you just kind of go in and cutting and doing the right ways as you go. Now, once it is dry, I remove the pins and glue down the track. Now, one thing I have to do is cut the track right here. You can see it's perfectly flush right there, and it comes in right there. Now, I was originally going to line up the ends so they sat perfectly, but I realized that cutting the track exactly where I needed to was going to work a lot better. The other thing is you do have to cut through the roadbed, so cut your track first and then cut through the roadbed. Try to not have a plastic tie that goes over that though. That's something that I would definitely try not to do. But once you have that, you can cut through it with just a little saw, and that'll go nice and neatly. You can actually just kind of cut it through right there. Now I can get to work to soldering all these feeders onto it. It's a little bit different the way that you have to wire this. You have to wire up each side independently. So all the sections on this side need their own feeder. So here, here, and then you're also going to want on each side of the turnouts right here, so here and here, and you're going to want to do the same thing for the other side, because if you don't, and you just rely on one single connection, you're going to have an interruption in connectivity at the fold. So wiring up each side is crucial. So basically everywhere there's a turnout or a braking continuity, so either here where there's an actual brake or turnout, I just put a feeder going to the section of track that would have been broken. Because this is a temporary layout, I just run a long wire to connect it to my DCC system right over there, and then just use some plugs to attach it. This works really great. I may end up putting its own DCC EX system in there, but who knows. The thing that we need to do here is we need to test how the locomotive runs across the track cuts. Let's give this thing a run. And we're good. Now I can paint this baseboard, something I always do, because if you have a few gaps in the Scenic material, it'll give you a nice little cover for that. So what I'm going to do is I just use cheap latex house paint. Basically, I go buy a quart of the cheapest one you can find. I just pick a brown that I like and mix that up. And make sure you get a matte finish on that. The quality of the paint really doesn't matter for this. And now we need to do our road work. I am doing all of the roads here with joint compound. This is one of my favorite methods for building roads, especially ones if you need nice even slopes or a lot of area covered that you want little or no seams on it. So the first thing I do is I use some painter's tape to paint the necessary lines to line off the road. This includes two of my crossings. One is a re-railer and one is just a section of track that I'm doing a custom crossing over. I covered those with painter's tape as well, and then I spread the joint compound. I don't need to worry about the smoothness right now, but I do need to worry about the evenness of the coat. And once I've got it completely coated, I let it dry. Once this is dry, I can sand it smooth. Now I'm just going to be using a hand sanding sponge for this because I don't want to throw too much plaster dust everywhere. And when I'm done with it as well, I'm bringing in a shop vac and I shop vac as much of the plaster dust out as well. Now for the crossings, I did come back in with some super thin sheet styrene that's actually for sale signs that I cut to size from Walmart. and I glue those to the approaches of the crossings, and they were less than $1 at Walmart. They're really awesome. And then I use some joint compound to smooth out the transition points of the crossings. And then I also used a little bit of styrene to put in the center insert of the crossing right over there, and then we can let everything dry. Once it is dry, I sand all of that smooth, and then I can get to painting the roads. Now, if you've watched this for a while, you know my painting technique for roads. I use some spray paint, and I start off by masking off any track that I do not want the paint to get on there that's close to where I will paint, because now I'm doing HO scale and I've actually got a good amount of distance between where I'm painting and where I'm not, so I don't have to mask off every single piece of track. I use some dark gray matte spray paint to put the base coat on. I'm spray painting the custom made crossing completely over and then immediately wiping the tops of the rails. Sometimes you may wipe a bit of the paint off of the styrene. Just come in and repeat the process until you get it perfect. I've also found that if you wrap like a paper towel around like a scrap piece of 2x4 or something and just hold it tight and wipe, you can get it just off the tops of the rails without wiping off the paint off of the crossing that you just painted. Now, after that gray dries, you're gonna come in with some matte black spray paint it. Now, I'll do this in bursts to give it like an uneven weathered asphalt look, because you can see that the coating is not completely even, so that's what that gives it that look. Now next, it was time to do some ballasting, but I tried to fold the layout down with some of the wheel brakes down, and that's when this happened. So what exactly happened? A small guide rod for the supports completely sheared off, and this was a piece of steel, and this caused the entire table to collapse. This nearly ended the entire project. Now, I managed to get the layout folded up and stored for about a week before I figured out what I was going to do. So I needed a new guide rod for that, but the rod was made of steel, and I do not have the skill or the knowledge to work with steel in that way. I don't have the knowledge to cut it, put holes in it, that kind of stuff. It takes tools that I don't have. What I can work with, and I have worked with in the past, is aluminum. I have to figure out the size of the tube that needs to go in the little guide, and then I needed to grab some nuts and bolts and nylon washers that I needed from my local hardware store, and I can get to work. Let me tell you right now that the relief that I had from when this worked was, I was like, okay, I'm back on track. The aluminum does flex when I fold and unfold it, so I need to be more careful when I do that, but for now, I can get back to working on the layout. Now it's time to ballast the track. Now, if you've seen me ballast before, this is no surprise. I start with some white glue on the side of the roadbed, then I pour my ballast and spread it evenly. I'm using some Scenic Express medium ballast for this, And once the ballast was spread, I could glue it down. So I soaked everything with 90% IPA and then used my Scenic glue mixture, which is 35% white glue and 65% water, with a few drops of dish soaps in there to help with the flow. By the way, that measurement's not accurate. Just do like right around a third and you'll be fine. Now, ballasting is not my favorite thing, but it is crucial for a model railroad, so it's definitely worth taking your time. Once that is done, I completely let it dry before doing anything else. Now, this is where the fun begins. It's time to place some of these buildings. I start by estimating exactly where I want everything. I've already done that a little bit, but really getting it more accurate here. For some of the buildings, they're nice enough to have their own base that I do not have to worry about them. For others, I'm going to need a base. So I start with some more sheet styrene and I cut it to size and glue it into place using some tacky glue. They're also spray painted before I glue them with a light matte heather gray, kind of that shade. So just something that looks like concrete, basically. Next, I glue the buildings into place, and yes, I am gluing them down. I actually thought about having where I just take them off when I'm putting the layout up, but I was like, let's just try to glue them down, see how it works. So I use tacky glue for this, but you can also use super glue if you want to be extra safe. And if you really want to be super safe, you can do some, since it's styrene right here, you can do some plastic cement and really get that stuff in there. Now, I did wait a long time before folding up this layout for storage. Oh yeah, by the way, I've been constantly folding and unfolding this layout for storage, so it's getting tested on the folds pretty well without even me having to try it, because I can't leave this out in my garage. My wife's got to park her car in here. Now, I also take the opportunity to glue all of these trees in place. Now, I'm not the biggest fan of pre-made plastic trees, but in this case, that is what I used, and the reason for this is I wanted them to be a bit sturdier than what I normally use. What I normally use looks very, very good, but does not hold very well up to moving around, and this thing was gonna move around. So I didn't wanna worry about it falling off and breaking and things like that. So pre-made plastic trees, a little bit more expensive, but worked great. And if they had a base with them, I went ahead and glued that in place with tacky glue. If they didn't, I drilled a hole and glued them in place. A lot of the ones I didn't have, I harvested from other layouts. This is also the point where I decided to add 2 of these Walther's train line kit houses for there. These are very inexpensive and pretty easy to build. You don't need to paint them or anything, just follow the instructions. I do recommend using plastic cement with them, something like Tamiya or something like that. Now we are in the home stretch. It is time for scenery. Now, I've made my scenery technique well known, and there is no need to change it for this. I start with a white glue base and then sprinkle some Earth Blend Scenic turf over it as my base coat. I then use a blended green turf and spread that over the Earth Blend, but I don't completely cover it. Next, I then bring in some dark green fine turf and sprinkle it sparingly over the scenery. And then finally, I sprinkle coarse turf over it to simulate weeds. This is a simple technique that has served me extremely well. It has worked really well in multiple scales. Now, what you have to do here after this is you soak it with IPA, just like the track, and then you completely drench it with that white glue water mixture that I told you about. And I really went kind of intentionally overboard with gluing this down because it needed to hold in place, and so I basically just put a crap ton of glue in there. And once that dried, I did need to fold it up to put it away before I did the rest of it. So we're gonna test and see if everything holds on this layout. And it does. Next, I add things like power poles like this one right here, so that when I do my scenery, I can spread it over it and they're nicely blended in and I don't lose the utility of their base. The one thing that I needed to do before I got all the scenery is I needed to do the little gravel parking pad right here for the house. Now this is actually just kind of a junk mixture of a lot of fine ballast that I've had. It has some of the Woodland Scenics gravel and things like that. If you don't have a bunch of this laying around, Woodland Scenics makes a great gravel product that you can try. Then it was off to covering the rest of the layout with Scenic material. Now, once that was dry, I had one last thing that I wanted to do, and that was weathering the track. Now, I do this with just some simple weathering powders in the middle of my track and kind of work my way out. And this is one thing that I have learned can really propel the look of your model railroad to the next level. And it is so simple to do. I just weather where a train would drip and drop grease, dust, and grime. You can obviously get way more into that. There's a whole rabbit hole of weathering, but just doing that simple effect is gonna make this look a lot better. And now let's check this thing out running. Now, I still have quite a bit of work I can do on this. I can really go crazy with the detailing, but this was a really fun and really challenging project, and I'm really happy that it all worked out because it was pretty nerve-wracking at some point. I finally have an HO scale layout that works for me in the space that I have and that I can run HO scale trains. Now, I'm still an N-scale primary. My giant N-scale layout is right over there, but this is gonna be fun just to try something different. You're gonna be seeing more of this, especially as we get into the peak model railroading season of this year. So I'm really excited to do more with this and do more with HO scale. I wanna thank Walther's for partnering with me on this project. They're an awesome company. They've been around for a really long time. They're one of the main staple companies of model railroading here in the US. You can check them out in the link in the description below, as well as all of the parts that I have used in this video. You can check them out in the link in the description below. Thank you all so much for watching. Until next time, I'm Jimmy from the DIY and Digital. Stay safe, be kind, and happy railroading. I'm gonna go put this thing up.